You're listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. This week, I get to sit down with Thomas Witholt to discuss all things shadow work and difficult emotions. Thomas is a divination coach, creator of the Lifeline Tarot, Lifeline Lenoracle, and Seaborn Kipper decks. He's also the author of Tarot Tableau, The Fool's Journey, Awaken the Court Cards, and many workbooks. As Thomas of Hermit's Mirror, he helps the spiritually curious use divination to reclaim their present, untangle their threads of the past, and weave their future fates. You can learn more about his work at hermitsmirror.com and find him online as @hermitsmirror. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Shannon.
So I've been super eager to chat with you today because we get to explore one of my favorite topics. We get to kind of get deep and explore shadow work and maybe even talk about the concept of unlearning what we've been led to believe are some quote unquote negative emotions like anger and envy and grief. And you have some really cool offerings around this exact topic. So it seemed like it would be a great conversation for you and I to have.
I am super excited for it.
You know, and shadow work, I feel like is this term that comes up a lot, both in the mental health communities, but a lot in the tarot community. And, you know, even though there's this maybe specific meaning or definition of both the shadow archetype and shadow work, I feel like the concept of that or the purpose really means something or can mean something different to everyone.
For sure.
So I'm sure like the way I view it might be slightly different than the way you view it or someone else. So I'm just curious, how does shadow work and even the concept of the archetype of the shadow show up for you? And what role does it play in your tarot practice?
Yeah, so I am not Jungian trained, so I have this sort of like loosey-goosey definition of shadow work and just how it applies. So I'm excited to have this conversation with someone who has more of that traditional scholastic background. So for me, the way that I see the shadow and shadow work in particular are those aspects of yourself that you intentionally try to avoid or hide because you have learned in some way, or it's been instilled in you, right? That kind of learning, not necessarily intentional learning, that it's bad or negative or something that you should be ashamed of. So a lot of the things that we may be ashamed about, or that honestly, one of the best ways of identifying a shadow that I've heard, and I got this from Benabel Wen, is something that triggers you in someone else in a totally irrational way. Yeah. And it just like sets you off and you know, like you think through it and you're like, oh, why is that my irrational pet peeve? And for me, through Benabel, it seemed like, oh, this is something that like I wish I could get away with, or this is something that I have worked really hard to suppress. And so seeing someone else not suppress it like triggers something within me. So for me, it tends to be those things that are undesirable on a sort of social level, usually, that we, you know, that they don't seem productive, right? Or they seem potentially harmful, or they just are antisocial in some way, but they're still deeply a part of us and our identity. And so shadow work is a way of sort of sifting through a lot of that to be able to find, right, like the diamond in all of that dirt, or the, you know, what's actually good in there. And one of the ways that, well, before I get into that, is there anything that you want to like chime in or sort of correct?
Oh, no. I mean, I actually really love how you're describing your kind of version of shadow work. And I love that you pointed out, use the word like society and or social, I think, and then use the word productive, two really important words. And then something you were talking about in terms of kind of Benebell Wen's view of the shadow, that's actually super Jungian. So I love that. It reminds me of that quote. It's something along the lines of like, what bothers us most about other people is basically some sort of projection of our own fears or unresolved trauma or insecurities. So I think that's such a beautiful way to describe something that is, deeply uncomfortable. And my view of the shadow and shadow work isn't very different from yours. I think it's also this collection of really unhelpful thoughts and beliefs, because I'm a therapist, that prevent us from being kind of true, authentic versions of ourselves. And I think a lot of those usually stem from inner child wounds. And then the process of, so that would be like the shadow, the archetype. And then the process of shadow work would be working to maybe uncover what those inner wounds are, or any sort of like internal oppositional forces that come up, like you were describing, reactions to people, and then figuring out where they come from, how they show up, either internally or externally in our relationships, and then how they shape the stories that we tell about ourselves and about the world around us.
Yeah, I really like the reminder of the projection, and a word that I was thinking about that I did not bring in earlier was disavowal, right? So that idea that like I can recognize in someone else or in some external thing, this thing that is undesirable, but I refuse to see it in myself, even though like my close knowledge of it is what allows me to see it in someone else. But that's, so for me, one of the things that sort of shaped my shadow work is this modern Western sort of Buddhism practice called feeding your demons, where, and Sultrim Allione has the sort of English language modernized Western version of this. And she says, or she explains it as, we've invested all of this energy into this demon, or as I would see it, your shadow, right? Like we've spent all of this time reinforcing it by sort of negative example, by putting a lot of energy into hiding it, working around it. Like it's very well developed in the amount of emotional energy or psychic energy that we've put into it. And so if we can just tap into it and heal it, nurture it, bring it out to make it an ally in some more positive, more helpful way, like imagine how much power it would give you in the sense of, and I think, right, if someone's thinking about like a really problematic impulse problem, like, oh, I don't want to bring that out, that's going to be a bad thing, right? Like you have to contextualize some of this. Like if you have, homicidal tendencies, like let's not let's not activate those. But
let's not do that.
Yeah, for the good of everyone, right? There are some antisocial things that we're not trying to champion. But they're, barring those extreme examples, right? There are things within that sort of ugliness, within that hurt, within that trauma that can be recovered. And you can, through this theory, which also I think is part of shadow work in the sort of psychic sense as well, you can bring it out to strengthen yourself, right? And to use as power in an active way, right? To like, oh, I've invested all of this energy into this thing. What if I used it for good, right? For my hopefully own and broader social good.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, I feel like is a lot like the Exile when we're doing parts work in the internal family systems model, which, a lot of this stuff overlaps. And I think what you're describing is, because like without doing this type of work, we're really just ignoring and repressing those parts. And you're saying like, let's bring them out, because I think if we don't, we're allowing them to just fester and then erupt in ways that are beyond our control. And I think this is one of the reasons I find tarot to be just so healing, because there's these images and their meanings, and they give us access to a space that maybe we might otherwise not have been able to access regarding our shadow or our exile. And I know for me, like when I'm pulling cards, just personally, whenever I'm pulling a card, I'm also analyzing in what ways is that archetype attached to my shadow, or in what ways does this card make me think about an aspect of my shadow in either a healthy way or an unhealthy way. So I love the way you're talking about how it's important to give space to these parts of ourselves, because there's so much shame attached to just being a human in general. And I think there's even more shame attached to the parts of us that are deemed not good.
Oh, so I think one of the great ways that tarot helps do that, you mentioned inner child healing. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I do related to shadow work is past life healing, which, that can be a different episode. Right. But these going back into the past, whether they're remembered past, fantasized past, lived historical past, whatever, I think that there's really this ability to locate sort of that root cause and do that inner root cause analysis, even if in something like past life for someone who doesn't even believe in reincarnation, right? It could be metaphorical, right? Like, what is the thing inside that I can point to and locate, and how can I honestly, like, how can I start to understand rationally something that if I try to look at my own shadow, like I can't see it, right? It's always sort of on the periphery. You just get it refracted to you when you see other things. But in locating it in this sort of other, even if it's ourselves, that's the other, right? This past version of ourself, it becomes, you get this sort of like more logical, rational way of approaching it. And I think tarot is that nice in between, right? That nice medium between the irrational and the rational, where it's like, okay, there's something happening on the surface here that my brain is recognizing. I've learned all these symbols. I can do image analysis. I have this personal reflection, but then I also have this intuitive sort of just gut response, this something that I can't totally explain that is coming from somewhere that is, much more cups than swords.
Absolutely. I feel like we should pull a card now.
Yeah.
We're like really getting into it. I was like, we could just keep going, but I really want to pull a card. All right. So I'm pulling from Tarot Vintage because I'm always pulling from Tarot Vintage. And it's a true extension of me at this point. Oh, got a jumper. That's so interesting because you were just talking about cups. I pulled 6 of Cups.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so that is one of my cards for both inner child and for past life. It's just sort of the, like I have this spread for connecting with inner child or past lives, which is based around the 6 of Cups.
It's honestly so fitting right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels also kind of like this invitation to reparent ourselves, because I love the way you view the 6 of Cups. I tend to view it as like, oh, okay, what happened in my past that I need to spend some time reassessing, especially if I didn't get exactly what I needed growing up. How can I give that to myself now? And it's interesting because I was talking about how the shadow and the shadow archetype could also be a representation of like that wounded inner child. And that this card very much feels like that. And how, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, having to unlearn and relearn what maybe we used to believe about certain emotions or ways of being, and giving ourselves time to really feel and sit with some of the things that we've either purposely suppressed or that have been repressed within us.
Well, speaking of that,
what did you pull?
I pulled the Emperor.
Oh, what are your thoughts on that?
So the Emperor is my personal shadow card in the terms of not like what represents shadow work, but the thing that tends to come up, right? Like there are all the daddy issues for a queer man.
For sure. I got it.
Right, and the reparenting. But then also, right, like that it can be for a lot of tarot readers like such a triggering card in that it can be this real source of like toxic masculinity and suppression and tyranny, right, when it's unhealthy in its expression, as I think a lot of us have experienced in our lives. And so it's also so important for your own personal sovereignty, right? Of saying like, I am an autonomous person. I get to make my decisions. I get to move through the world how I want. I have power for myself. And that's also really scary for people because we have all of these examples of people who abuse power. And so for those of us who see that, right, or who have been abused by power, it can be really scary to step into. And so I think a lot of us, particularly who do this work or who are in sort of caring professions or, vocations, I think there's a real hesitation to embrace the importance of this particular card and archetype, right? Like I think a lot of tarot readers really like the High Priestess and the Empress, right? And the Emperor is sort of like, I don't know, like that could go so wrong so quickly. And I think it goes beyond the gender aspect.
Yeah, I mean, the way you're talking about it is so important because I do think there's this almost, I don't want to use the word negative, I'm going to, negative stigma attached to that card. But at its core, it really can offer us the stability and the structure that we were missing out on either growing up or even just at earlier times in our life when we felt like we didn't have the opportunity to truly speak for ourselves or share what was happening for us internally or even externally. Whereas, the Emperor is really, in a healthy sense, can have really clear boundaries and really speak their mind and say, this is what's happening. This is what I need. These are my expectations. This is what's going on. And you can still do that in a compassionate, curious way. But I feel like that doesn't typically come across with that particular archetype because, there is kind of this, it's not as soft as cards. It's like, the Empress or the High Priestess, like you mentioned. But, when we think about even stepping into that role, like you said, we might not know how to step into that role or what that looks like because we didn't have anything appropriately modeled for us. So now we have the opportunity, or we could look at it as an opportunity and say, how do I want to exist moving forward? Because I'm having this human experience that is going to be wrought with, pain and discomfort and despair, but also joy and pleasure. And maybe you were never taught how to appropriately regulate when you were experiencing these negative emotions and you were only, I guess this is where the Emperor comes in, maybe from like daddy issues or like a negative standpoint. I know like for me growing up, like I was always told like if I was crying, like walk it off, like go to your room and like come out when you're done. Like that could be very Emperor energy, maybe from a shadow perspective. But you could also look at the Emperor and even with the Six of Cups and say, well, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to step into this reparenting role and have this stability and this sense of structure that the Emperor offers and give myself also space, a compassionate space where I'm sitting down and saying, okay, what's happening for me? Where does this come from? How can I manage it?
Yeah, I think that idea of compassion, right, from the Six of Cups and that tenderness is in such contrast to how most of us view the Emperor. And I think part of that, right, in the Pamela Coleman Smith's illustration, he has his armor on underneath, right? Like he's this ex-warrior. You have this very strong face-off kind of posturing. And so like there's no, you have the stone throne, you have the mountains in the background. Like there's nothing soft other than maybe the little robe that he's wearing on top. And it just seems like such a facade that it's like, oh yeah, there's something sort of smooth and fabricy here, but everything else is stone and metal, including, the man who's sort of the man as a mountain. But I do think that there's room for that kind of compassionate, giving, nurturing parental figure from the emperor, just as there is with the empress. It's just the emperor represents that structure that so often is handed down as discipline, right? Or as punishment, or as having no softness. It's the square lines of or the straight lines of the square, right? Of that number 4. And I don't know that it's necessary in the same way that I think a lot of us assume that it has to be, because, right, all of that structuring, all of that foundation building, all of that support, that can all be scaffolding as well. Right? In that it helps the Empress's garden to grow. Right? Like, I like to see the emperor paired with the Empress, right? Where she is pure creation and chaos and nature, and the emperor comes in and sometimes tames that and contains it and controls it, which can be very off-putting, depending on how you want to be viewing that Empress energy, but at the same time allows it to be put to use. So if the Empress is Mother Nature, the forest, whatever, then I would see the Emperor more as like the vegetable garden.
Oh, this is interesting. In fact, the way you're talking about everything, you used a couple phrases. I mean, even just like when you think about the process, I mean, I love a good nature metaphor, the process of, nature, gardening. And then you use the word scaffolding. And then you also, a moment ago, were talking about the different layers in the emperor. And you specifically noted like maybe the softness of the robe, but that's like the only softness part of it. And it's really got me going back to Jung and his work on the unconscious, because he believed that, our shadow represents unconscious aspects of our personality. So, which are, of course, made up from repressed or even like disowned emotions or traits or desires that we have. And then he believed that integrating all of those parts of our shadow into our conscious level of awareness, that new layer, different layer of the scaffolding, if you will, was really important to the process of individuation, which is essentially just like continued personal growth and introspection and self-awareness. And I feel like really you're talking about that same concept in such a beautiful way, especially in terms of cards that can be really difficult for folks. And I feel like, that it's part of that process is being willing to look at some of these emotions or the archetypes like the emperor, that we maybe tend to try to avoid because we feel shame or they're difficult or they're negative. And actually see like, okay, well, what role is this playing in my life? And in what way does this role encourage that personal growth and that process of individuation?
So what I love about you saying individuation, which this may be like going far afield, but I consider the Lovers to be a card of individuation.
Oh, totally. Me too. We're on the same page.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, right, like, and in the Thoth tradition, not necessarily in the Rider-Waite-Smith, but you have the Emperor and the Empress together as the union in the Lovers card in that deck. And I think that's like such a, I don't know if that's relevant, but I was like, oh, okay, we're just talking about Emperor and Empress. Yeah. Now you're talking about individuation, which I see is very much tied to, although not the entirety of the meaning of the Lovers.
Absolutely.
So that's exciting. The one thing I also was thinking about as you were talking, going back to that Six of Cups, right, is we both were saying like compassion, right, but it's also a gift that's being given sort of backwards.
Right.
And, I think it's, as you're sort of struggling with certain cards, like the Emperor or the Hierophant was a big one for me as well. Honestly, pretty much any of the men in the major arcana, if we're honest, other than the Magician.
Right.
Going back and saying like, okay, what is let me look at this as I would my own shadow, like with compassion, understanding like this is not some monster inside of me. Like this comes from some place that needs healing, that needs care, that needs love. I can be giving that love to it. Similarly, I could look at the Emperor, right? Like, oh, these negative things that I think about the Emperor, or these negative things that I think about the Hierophant, right? Like that's not based in nothing. So I can let my self-judgment about that judgment go, but also recognize like, what is that coming from? right? What is there, if I sort of assume positive intent from these cards, what can they provide that actually would really be a gift that I want to take on, that I want to better understand within myself, because maybe I feel like it's lacking, and so or that I have been taught that I don't get to use that kind of power, right, in a positive way. And so I really need to reassess my relationship with those. Like, what is my real struggle against the Hierophant? Like, okay, yeah, I'm not Catholic, but I have challenges with religion in my past, and understanding that. But like, what is it that is such a problem for me about that card? What does that tell me about my own desires that maybe I'm hiding from myself, or some sort of community connection that I want that I'm not able to have? And then how can I treat that part of myself with that Six of Cups love, and hopefully move forward with it, right? Like, of saying, okay, now that I see where it's coming from, I understand what it is that it's exposing within me. If I just treat that part of myself with the tenderness, with the compassion, so that it's able to grow in a healthy way, like what's possible as a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, everything that you're saying is bringing me back to the Lovers, which I'm so glad you actually brought that card up, because everything that you're describing, even now, I'm using Tarot Vintage, but I'm thinking about Tarot of the Divine, that deck, and how that creator shows the Lovers as the Beauty and the Beast, basically. And I feel like that's so fitting for kind of where this conversation is going, because there's this one part of us that maybe is, I mean, I didn't realize we were going to I knew we were obviously talking about Jung because the shadow is very Jungian. But, you know, the Beauty and the Beast version of this card might be the persona, right? This part of us that we show to the world, society, the quote unquote good parts, you know, that we feel like are socially acceptable. And then the beast is everything that you were just describing, you know, all of these, you know, the discomfort and the pain and the stories that either we've experienced or that we've written. And we have to figure out how to make space for both of these. And I think, you know, using the image of the Beauty and the Beast, there's this like beautiful dance that happens between the two of them. And this kind of invitation to say, you're allowed to exist in this space with me. But, you know, think about when you're dancing, like, you know, one person may lead, the other person may lead. You know, there has to be this delicate balance between, you know, what's happening between the both of you, so that's not a total shit show. And, you know, I think that's really what we're describing right now. Like, how do we allow the parts of us that maybe we are ashamed of or that we are wanting to hide, how do we allow those to have a platform in a way that isn't going to be so vulnerable that we kind of freeze up and you know, don't know how to move forward, but also in a way that isn't maladaptive, you know, because one of the things that you and I had talked about, you know, earlier was, you know, unlearning maybe some quote unquote negative emotions and how we've been taught that maybe we're not supposed to be feeling them. And I feel like using that Lover's archetype is a good way to say, hey, like, who do we want to dance with right now, and figure out why you're here and what's going on and how I can embrace you in a way that's healthy and not maybe reactive. I guess like right now I'm kind of just thinking about anger.
Yeah.
And how like, you know, that's such a reactive emotion. And it's also so layered because behind anger is pain and fear or embarrassment, shame. I mean, so many things. But it's certainly not something that we should avoid. I mean, I'm even thinking about your thoughts on the Hierophant. Like, you might have a lot of anger towards that card, you know, and exploring and allowing that anger to come to the surface and figure out, okay, why are you here? Why do you exist? You know, how can I, you know, hold space for you and have a conversation with you is really important.
Do you want to pull a card about anger?
I totally do. Oh, that's funny. The Emperor fell out, but it fell out, so I'm not going to talk about the Emperor. I'm just going to keep going. The Emperor just wants to make itself known today.
Yeah. You know, I mean, and that is one of the gifts of the Emperor, right?
All right, Knight of Swords.
So I had several flip over So I'm going to go with the one that was on top, which was the King of Wands in reverse.
Ooh, okay. Court cards. Interesting. So Knight of Swords and King of Wands, you said?
Yeah, and for me, I use reversal. So the King of Wands in this case was in reverse, which for me, using the court cards in reverse is a great way of sort of getting at their shadows or their negative aspects.
Absolutely.
And what I get out of the King of Wands in reverse in particular, right, is that pride and that ego and that, like, I listen to me, right? Like he's starting to he's like leaning forward in his throne, just demanding to be heard in a way similar to your emperor, right? And there's all of that fire inside that I think can be very rageful. That I think comes from a place of like wounded pride very often, right? There's fear that's tied to, there's anger that's tied to fear of like what's happening to me. Like I need to lash out and fight back, which maybe is more like the Knight of Swords.
Right.
But then I think there's also that defensiveness that becomes aggressive, right? Like, oh, they've undermined me, or they've found sort of a vulnerability, and so I need to flare up and act back.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about these two cards together because, the image of the Knight of Swords is very reactive. There's this, sense of anger tends to come from a few different places. And I feel like that's what I'm getting from this Knight of Swords. It's like, we feel like we've been wronged. So like there's a sense of injustice, or we feel like there's some sort of unmet need that we have that someone has maybe blatantly ignored or made us feel like isn't important. Or we have some sort of unhealed pain point that someone stepped on. Or there's been a total violation of a boundary, either a boundary that has been explicitly stated or one that hasn't. And I feel like the Knight of Swords here is like, this just happened to me and now I'm coming after you. Yeah. And it's because something was activated and then you just it's very much like, again, to go back to internal family systems and parts work, the Exile, where it's it's just kind of automatic. This thing has been triggered. And, if we haven't spent time exploring any of the repressed emotions that we have, then they do arise from this place of reactivity, like the Knight of Swords, which can be incredibly harmful to ourselves, others, relationships, because I can't tell you how many people have come into my office and been like, I don't know, stuff just comes out of my mouth. I don't think before I speak, or I just did this thing. And I just, now I'm having to repair this, whole relationship, all because of this one moment of reactivity. And, not to say that, we're going to get to this point where we're never reactive or we never have these moments, because none of us are ever going to be perfect. But when we're able to sit back and say, okay, well, what are these, pain points, or what are my boundaries, or when do I feel a sense of injustice? That's when we can take a look and say, okay, how can I manage when times like this happen so that I don't just kind of spring into action and then have to clean up the mess later?
Yeah, I think, right, like that sort of the pace of the Knight of Swords, like it's the fastest moving of the knights. It's this very expansive, just like speed on top of speed. There's no time for thinking because of that reactivity, right? But I think it just sort of short circuits any real depth of thought, right? And it just hits something instinctual that I think if you can, from maybe in a reflective state later, right? Because you're sort of in the moment with that Knight of Swords, look back to say okay, well, what is it that what about this is what set me off? Because I feel like the Knight of Swords is very much a set off feeling, right? Okay, now we're just going to slam into action, get the details later. We don't have time for anything else.
Right.
Right. But if you can take that step back and say, where was this coming from? What was going on here? He is the most armored as well in a lot of decks, but I think in the Smith Waite, right? And I don't know if the horse has any armor. Well, I guess the Pentacles also has a fair amount of armor.
Yeah.
It's just, he's not doing much. But there's something very, he is he's the Knight of Swords, right? He is battle ready. Like he's not just on a horse riding around. He is entering a fight. Right. And so like that aspect of just that total short circuit and going into that immediate fight response, or flight, right? Like he could be speedily exiting. But there's, so one of the things that I think is interesting about the King of Wands and the Knight of Swords, the way that I view the elemental correspondences, it is controversial with the Knights and Kings. Again, that could be a different episode. But for me, the Kings are tied to air because they're the thinkers, they're the planners, they're the managers. They're going to sort of communicate out what they need done, and the Knights are actually going to get it done. And so they're fire, right? Like they do the thing, they have all of the energy. So the Knight of Swords is the fire of air, and the King of Wands is the air of fire. And they have this expansive, sort of explosive quality when you combine both of the outward directed expressive elements, which are fire and air, in contrast to the more receptive earth and water, right? And so there's just this need to like take up a lot of space very quickly. And so there's nothing really grounding them either. Like there's nothing bringing them back to center or bringing them back to earth, because they're rising elements. They move up and out. They don't ever sort of bring back to self. And so there's a lot of missing self-reflection that's possible, and that it's great energy when it's channeled in the right direction, right? The King of Wands can be very inspiring, but there's nothing sort of tethering them back down to reality, and they don't really answer to anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you brought in the elemental components here, because it's true. Like there is nothing that's really grounding either of these, and it's so fascinating that we were kind of segueing into anger, and that these are the two cards that really came out.
Yeah.
Like, especially together, it's like, oh, damn. Okay. Like, how are we going to mitigate this? Because this is intense. And it kind of makes me think about how, our anger doesn't go away just because we are fighting, or even when we like ask for an unmet need to be met, or if we set a boundary, or, it's not that we're never going to experience anger again, because I think the reality that exists here is that we're technically kind of at the mercy of other people. So, if they refuse to acknowledge the source of our anger, for example, we have to decide what to do with that information. And do we embrace the concept of radical acceptance? And then, we're on this horse. We have the opportunity to like easily leave, so we can choose what direction we want to move towards. I mean, I know that's difficult. We can decide, no, screw it. I'm just going to keep charging towards this person because I'm angry. And then, I feel like that reversed King of Wands is kind of there whispering in the Knight's ear, like, yeah, go get him, but if we're desperately trying to get people to hear and understand us, they're not going to hear and understand us when we're in that heightened state. So we have to figure out, okay, at what point can I bring myself to really look at what's going on? Because you could say, I can see that neither of us are in a place to explore this right now. So since I'm on the horse, I'm going to choose to turn around and maybe just ride the hell out of this thing and expel some of this heightened energy that I have, because whatever you're doing in the moment isn't going to get you anywhere. But I understand that's also way easier said than done. It does take a lot of practice, though. And part of that is being self-aware, knowing that maybe you're easily activated, or when someone says a certain thing to you or does a certain thing, you turn into that combo reverse King of Wands, Knight of Swords energy. And you have to be able to be like, okay, shit, I was about to hop on this horse, but I got to figure out what I'm going to do now instead.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting, right? That metaphor of the horse, and in Pamela Coleman Smith's illustration for the Rider-Waite, that horse is terrified. So you're like riding fear into battle.
You're so right.
Right. And so like this fear is the thing that's carrying you. And yeah, you think you can control it, but it's going to go where it needs to go because it has the survival instinct. So even though you may think like, oh, okay, I'm angry. I want to go after this person. So I was just yesterday re-listening to your episode on revenge.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so that idea of, right, like, okay, I have this intention to use my anger in this way, but actually I'm not in control of where that anger goes because I haven't got this fear, this horse really under control. Like I can just sort of make my best efforts where it's going to take me. And so that's why, so for me, like when I'm thinking through anger, right, like there tend to be two different directions that it goes. One is fear, like where is this coming from? Because I think so often, when people lash out, it's out of a place of fear or, well, yeah, usually fear, right? There could be other reasons, but I think fear is often at the core of those things. And then how could we potentially be using this once we understand that fear and what really matters to us, right? Like what is the thing that we are scared of losing, the thing that we are scared of being made vulnerable, the thing that we're trying to protect, right? Like how can we use that mama bear rage in a positive way, or in a way that at least we and our, social supporters consider to be positive? Like how can we use that in a more thoughtful way that actually addresses the core need that we have? Because I think that's the big thing with shadow work, right? Is like we have this response that we think is solving a problem. Maybe it's a survival instinct, but actually like it's a bad lesson that we've learned or a bad habit that we've developed over time. And actually, if we understand sort of what's the real issue, then we can see the parts of our response that maybe are appropriate and others that maybe are completely counterproductive to where we want to go, or what we are trying to be doing. And so I love that idea of that horse, right? Thinking about the horse and like, where is that taking us? How much can we control it? If we start to understand that fear underneath it, like we have a better shot of moving towards some positive use of assertive energy, let's say, instead of necessarily just, anger.
Yeah, this has me thinking about, just from a therapeutic standpoint now, the idea of real versus perceived danger, real versus perceived threats. And our bodies and our brains can't really tell the difference. So sometimes there might not be a real threat, but our body goes into fight or flight and we feel like we have to hop on that horse and immediately respond. So also a huge part of shadow work involves being able to sit back and say, hold on, how do I know when I'm really in danger? And how do I know when I'm really like not, and I'm actually safe? And if you come from an environment where you are constantly hypervigilant and having to be like that Knight of Swords energy and on guard and ready to go, your body is now programmed to exist in that state. And you have to work really, really hard to figure out how to regulate your emotions and just exist in like a state of contentment, which feels really unsafe and almost makes that fear mechanism and that anger mechanism even more heightened. So that's a whole entire process that you have to go through if you're someone who's experiencing that and knowing like, okay, there are moments when I'm actually safe and I don't have to hop on that horse. But that takes a lot of work, being able to identify, when do I feel safe? How do I know I'm safe? Because you may have been wired to not think about that and only think about and be aware of the times when you're not, which from an evolutionary perspective, our brains are already pre-wired to search for danger. Like they just are. So if you're someone who also has a history of trauma, not only are you wired from an evolutionary biological perspective to search for danger, but now from, this deep somatic level, you have been as well. And that can take a lot of time. This isn't something that, happens overnight or even a couple days. Like sometimes it's a lifelong journey to figure out, okay, How do I know when this anger and this fear is coming from a place because I'm actually in danger or because I've perceived that I am?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm thinking back to that Six of Cups because it is such a, palliative to anger, right? It's like this nice, calm, soothing water. The Six is harmonious. Like it's just such a nice, chill flow state that is very different from like the Four of Cups, right? That idea of just sort of letting the emotion go. But it's like, no, this emotion needs to flow out in some way. Like it needs clearing, but it needs softening first, right? It can't just all be on fire. And I think having awareness of where that false perception of danger is coming from, right? Like giving yourself, again, that compassion to say like, okay, this is not the ideal response, but it's probably coming from somewhere. Let me get curious about where it's coming from and then work on healing that particular wound, right? Of bringing some of that water to, the raging fire that is at the source of that anger.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I love that you brought it back to the Six of Cups because now I'm thinking that is very much asking the question, what do I need? Mm-hmm. That's what you were just kind of alluding to just now. And I feel like that's a really good place to exist when you are doing this work. What do I need when? What do I need when I'm in a heightened state? What do I need when I'm angry? What do I need when I'm in this place? What do I need when I'm around this person? So many times we don't know what we actually need because we've never been given the opportunity to figure that out. We've never had the compassion from other people to even look at us and say, what do you need right now? So a lot of times we haven't even been able to give that any sort of thought. And so sitting down with your cards, for example, and if you don't know, and if you're like, I literally do not know what I need in this moment, pull a card and see what comes up, because that's going to jog something for you, because I feel like it's so, we can talk about, these emotions and these experiences all day, but the way that you manage them and what you need when you're in that space is so unique to you. Mm-hmm. And really it goes back to, I love that we've been talking about compassion so much this episode, giving yourself the space and the compassion to just be curious about what's happening to you internally, and then being willing to experiment. Okay, I pulled this card that said I might need, this. I don't know, if you pull a Three of Cups, okay, maybe I need a support system. So when I'm angry, I'm going to, text my friend. And if that doesn't help, okay, try something else next time. That doesn't mean that, this thing isn't going to help your anger. It just means that thing wasn't appropriate for at, that point in that situation.
I think what's so beautiful about using the cards when you don't know what you need is that they give you permission to need something, right? Like you don't have to be the one who says, oh, I need to reach out to my mom. But when the Empress pops up, you're like, oh, I just need to talk to my mom. Like, it's not a big deal, right? The tarot said it was fine. And it gives you that ability to not feel needy because it feels like, oh, no, this isn't just me, running away to lick my wounds or whatever, right? Like, again, sort of a negative shame response. It outsources that and allows us to, not that we're handing over control to the cards because we're ultimately the ones who are interpreting it, right?
Right.
But it gives the permission to say, oh, okay, this is the thing that deep down I wanted, but I wasn't willing to say for myself. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, the cards are letting me say it. And sometimes we don't know. And I think that that's totally true. But so often we know as soon as we see the card because we knew deep down, right? That's how tarot works most of the time.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love the way you just described that, because I think that can even induce some form of anger when we are like, oh, I need something and I don't want to need something. Mm-hmm. But you saying that the cards give us permission is really beautiful. I love that. So this was really enlightening. And I love talking about shadow work and talking about uncomfortable emotions. That's what I do all day. So I really appreciate you coming coming on the podcast and diving into that world with me. I know that we didn't even get to some of the other emotions that we were going to talk about. So now you just have to come back and have a conversation with me later.
Darn, Shannon. I guess I will.
So sorry. But can you tell us where folks can find you and if you have anything going on right now?
Yeah. So folks can find me at hermitsmirror.com. So that's like the hermit from the tarot, all one word, hermitsmirror.com, or on Instagram. Username is Hermit's Mirror, no weird punctuation or underscores or extra numbers at the end. Those are scammers.
Yeah.
Those are the two places where I'm most active. Depending on, I think, based on when I think this is coming out, I should be starting up a fall semester of classes. That's going to start up in September, just to get, I like to teach people who are familiar with tarot how to read tarot better. Like I see myself very much as a tarot coach, because there aren't that many great resources for intermediate or even advanced tarot that, dive into some special topics that still are willing to bring things down to a very fundamental level to like layer and scaffold. Speaking of the Emperor, right? That's how I like to teach. This year, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently with sort of like a class pass version where you would just sign up for the semester and then have access to all of these self-paced classes and then live sort of like office hours and some live one-off class sessions. So it's not like you have to commit to 6 weeks every Wednesday at 6 p.m., but more of like a flow in and out of classes as the specific topic and your schedule allows, just to give people flexibility while also having, some live time as well, not all self-paced.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for hopping on here and chatting with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok under the handle @TheTarotDiagnosis and join us while we pull daily cards and explore tarot and mental health in between podcast episodes. You can also subscribe to our podcast to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you have a topic or question that you'd like for us to explore on the podcast, you can contact us directly on our website, www.thetarotdiagnosis.com.